You ready to go live?
Don't ask me. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's do
I'll say
this.
no, but
Hello everyone! Happy Wednesday! We're back in another online event of the Chicago Flutter Meetup, this time with our favorite Mandy. Hello!
hey.
So I've heard that you're going to be talking about the Flare controller.
Yep. We'll be going into some details on how to extend it and how to run some event triggers with it, and yeah, we'll build a really fun little app.
Awesome. So I just want to let the group know that it seems like we're going to be doing these online events for a while. So feel free to share these events. Feel free to add them to your own meetups. The fact that they're organized by the Chicago group is just a way to advertise it, to spread the word. But like definitely this is something that belongs to everyone. It's gonna be recorded on YouTube, so if you wanna watch it two, three, as many times as you want, you're free to do it. With that said, I'm gonna shut up because you wanna see Mandy, not me. So the floor is yours. I'm gonna turn off my video and I'm gonna let you do your awesome thing. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, first off, I want to say a big thank you to Jorge and the Chicago Flutter group. That's it's a huge honor that he asked me, and of course everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I know that everyone's got a lot on their minds right now with the C word, the COVID word. But yeah, thanks for tuning that out and tuning into this. Yeah. So I'm going to do a really super fast intro because I'm not into talking about myself, but I've been a dev for a little while, about a decade. I got started in mobile on iOS in 2009. I've been developing games and apps since. One of the things I love about Flutter is obviously the hot reload, but also the awesome community. So thank you all again. I haven't been to a Flutter event yet that, you know, the community just hasn't been awesome and welcoming, so I appreciate that. Speaking of community, I wanted to give a shout out to my Flutteristas. The shirt on. Yeah. If you're a woman or non-binary and you're in the Flutter community and you want to join the Flutteristas, definitely reach out to me at She Who Codes, and I can get you into the group. We have a Discord channel that we talk about different things if you need support. We also have monthly video calls that we can kind of loop you in on that. But yeah, so my shameless plug there for the Flutteristas. So today we're going to be talking about extending the FlareController. I don't know everyone's level of experience with that, so I'm going to just kind of go from beginner, and then we'll dive into some more advanced topics like how to get a trigger to, or how to get an event to trigger, things like that. So yeah, it'll be a little bit of fun. This is what we'll be working in today. This is our animation. Pretty fun. Let's see here. So it's gonna be based off of the basic Flutter project, all the boilerplate code that you get whenever you log in or whenever you first create a Flutter project. You know, in that project, every time you press a button, it increments the count. This is gonna kind of add something more visually stimulating to that. To quote Mark Thompson, we'll add some flash to the app. But yeah, so this will be the progress radio. So this was created using Flare Arrive. Some of the things that we'll be doing, we'll be working in are artboards, nodes, events, and animations. I'm going to kind of show you guys around a little bit.
Mandy, I
Um,
apologize for interrupting, but you're not sharing the screen.
oh shit.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Sorry about that.
Awesome.
Guess it was...
Now it works. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Missed that that little detail. But yeah, I'm gonna kind of skip through some of these slides. All right, so you can see what we're working in. All right, so this is the progress radial. And as you tap in the Flutter default app, it'll fill up the radial. Whenever it's done, you can tap it and reset it. All right, so on to the art side. We have our artboard here. And then we have our radial, which is a node. And then we have a trigger node, which will have an event on it. And within the animation, it'll actually trigger that event. And we'll kind of dive into some code to show you how to do those things. Let's see here. Some other things. Yeah. Our animations have all of our keys. So you can kind of see through that. And then on the code side, we're going to be diving into some widgets. We'll have a stack of container, and the container will hold our Flare actor. And then we'll have a button, the default button that's built in the app, that'll have our button presses to increment the count. We'll also have our FlareController. And in our FlareController, we'll get a reference to the artboard. We'll have events that get triggered, and then we'll have our actor animation. And then part of the event will also be like an audio player. We have a plugin that we'll be using for that, and that'll just play a sound on the event. So yeah. So the very first thing, like I said, I'm going to go through this from the very, very beginning. We need to pull in our dependencies. And so that's going to be the Flare Flutter and the audio player. And let's see here. Then we also are going to drag in our assets. So whenever you export from the site, there will be this export button right here. And you can either do it as a JSON or a binary. And it'll give you a .flr file, a .flare file. And so when we drag that into our assets folder, we definitely need to make a reference to it here, as well as whatever sound effect that you want to use for the trigger event. All right. And then obviously we'll have to do packages get. And then as part of our Flutter project, there's a lot of boilerplate code. A lot of it we're using, but a lot of it we can kind of just get rid of, clean up. Here I like to just remove all the comments just to make it easier to read. And then also, since we've pulled in our dependencies in our pub spec, we can go ahead and import our packages here. We're going to be using flair_actor.dart, and in a little bit we'll create this custom Flare controller. All right. So, as I mentioned, we're using the floating action button. That's staying the same. We have all of this boilerplate code, the center, but we've changed this to a stack because we want the Flare actor and the floating action button to just kind of be on the same stack. And then within the stack, we're gonna have a container that takes up the full width and height of the screen. And the child of the container is gonna be our Flare actor. Now, just for demo purposes, like just to get things up and running, you can add your Flare actor and then just put an animation in just to make sure it's running. That's what I always like to do. But we're gonna be changing the animation and adding a controller here in a bit. So this is very, very basic Flare actor. This is just to get something kind of up and running quickly. All right. So next thing we're gonna do is create a custom FlareController, and it's gonna extend the built-in FlareController. And so because we're extending that, there's gonna be some required overrides. We're gonna have our Initialize, where we'll get a reference to our artboard, our animations that we'll be using. The set view transform, which is required, but we're not gonna be using that this time. And then our advance, which is basically called every frame. And it is required since, again, we're extending the FlareController, but this is also where a lot of the magic's gonna happen. We'll be stepping through two of our animations in this, and checking which animation should play. Yeah. And up at the top, I don't know, we have our imports, which are important as well. We're going to be using Flare_controller, Flare.dart, Math2D.dart, and then our audio player. And of course, the audio player is kind of optional. Part of our trigger is not only playing a sound, but also letting us know when we can go ahead and play a secondary animation. You can use triggers for pretty much anything. You know, once you have that trigger built in as a keyframe in the animation, you can do a lot with it. But for today's purpose, we're going to be playing a sound and triggering the next animation. All right, so now that we've kind of stubbed out our custom FlareController, we can drop it back into the Main.dart and get a reference to it, declare it up there. Then, now that we've done that, we can go ahead and go back to our Flare actor widget and set a controller. And so we just have that all set up right there. And then we have a few different animations. We have our intro animation. Then we have our fill animation for the radial. This is going to be our fill animation right here. And then we'll have a pop-up animation, which is right there. And then it starts back all over again. Okay. And so yeah, we're setting the animation to intro for now, so that right whenever the app loads up, you'll see something happening on the Flare actor. All right, so then getting into the main part of this whole thing, we'll go back to the custom FlareController. We have a few variables we want to set up. The first and most important one is the Flutter actor artboard. The artboard is where everything lives. That's where all of our nodes are. And the artboard has a reference to all the animations for each object in it. You can have multiple artboards in each of your .flare files, but in this example, we're just using the one artboard. And having multiple artboards could be really useful if you're building out a UI for an app. So for example, if you want to have, you know, a different, a few different types of pop-ups that'll animate and, you know, have different triggers so that each time they animate, they play different sound effects. You can have an artboard for each of those. You could also do artboards for different characters, things like that. So for this purpose, again, we're just gonna have one artboard. And then we're gonna have a couple booleans. We have that pop-up. So we need to make sure that we're at a point where we can animate the pop-up or even show the pop-up. And those get set to true whenever the pop-up, whenever the radial is full, we'll show the pop-up. And the first time the radial is complete, we'll actually animate the pop-up. And then upon completion of the pop-up animation, we'll turn that back to false, so it can't keep animating, keep repeating. We have a few doubles. We have an increment amount, and this is how much we're gonna increment that radial fill with each tap. So you can get creative with this. I came up with a number. You know, it also depends on your animation. You can do it in segments. You can do it pretty much, you can get really creative with it. But yeah, each time you tap, how much do you want your radial to fill up to keep going throughout that circle? Let's see here. We also have your fill, which that will be increased by your increment amount. And that lives within a function that gets called from the tap on the Main.dart. Then we also have our current fill, which gets incremented in the advance. And we have smooth time so that the animations don't seem like really jerky or laggy. You know, they look smooth. Again, that's another number you can play with and, you know, see 5 felt good to me, but, you know, 3 could feel good to you. It depends. And then also we have our animation time for the pop-up animation. So that time gets incremented as is playing. Then finally we have our flare animation layer, which will be our fill animation. That's our base animation. That's what everything is dependent upon. And then we have our actor animation, which is a pop-up animation. And then finally we have our audio down there at the bottom. And still working in our Flare custom controller, we are going to initialize everything. So here's where on start, we can get a reference to our artboard and to our 2 animations based off that artboard. So here we have, like I mentioned earlier, we have 3 different animations. We have an intro animation, a fill animation, and then an ending pop-up animation. And so our base animation is our filling animation, where the radial is going all the way up. And then our pop-up animation, which is you know, the pop-up that happens whenever it's full and lets the user know how to restart from the beginning. And then this is the fun math that I came up with for the increment amount. I came up with the whole duration of the animation divided by 29, because that's what kind of looked right to me. It also depends on how your app is, your animation, sorry, is segmented. So if it's segmented perfectly so that it would be like each quarter, it would be on a radial, you know, you're looking at a clock type thing. Each quarter it would fill up. That's kind of how I came up with that. So yeah, we'll be using that increment amount. All right, so we can set up a few different functions that will be used both in this class and in our Main.dart. The very first one is going to be our increment fill. So each time you're tapping that button widget on the Main.dart, we're calling into this and we're incrementing it. And you're incrementing your fill. As long as your radial is not full, we want to increment that. And if your radial is full, then we want to go ahead and reset everything again. Let's see here. Then we also have our isFull function, our check. It's a Boolean check to see if we are full. So if the fill is greater than 1, then we know that the animation is complete. At that point, the increment button will change from a plus to a reset icon. And then obviously our play sound, which will play the sound on the trigger. So these are all pretty basic, nothing too out of the ordinary here so far. It'll be when we get into the advanced that we'll get into the nitty-gritty of some of this stuff. All right, so here's the pop-up code. This is the nitty-gritty. So this is our advanced function. It gets called, like I mentioned earlier, pretty much every frame. We have our Boolean here checking if we should show our pop-up. And again, if the radial is full, then we want to show our pop-up. And if the radial is full and we want to animate the pop-up, then we'll go ahead and animate that. Here's where we have our pop-up animation, which we had declared in the init earlier. And we're going to apply the animation time, which is being incremented by the elapsed time, with the modulus of the entire pop-up animation duration. That way, it's smoothly animating. And we have a reference to our artboard that we declared at the start, and then our one for mixing. This is where we can go ahead and check if the animation is complete. If the animation time with the pop-up animation duration is greater than the entire duration of the animation, then we know our animation is complete. It's done. So we have this on completed, where we pass a string of the animation name, and we just compare the name to the name of our animation. So in this example, on completed, we're passing the pop-up animation name, which was in pop-up. And as long as those two compare, then we know that we shouldn't be animating our pop-up anymore. Otherwise, it'll just keep going and going and going and going, and it'll look really weird to the user. So it's not too complicated with this. You can see where we're applying time pass to smoothly show this animation. I hope that makes sense. I'll know in 30 seconds if it doesn't, because of the delay. So yeah, and again, we're only going to show this animation when the radial is full. All right. Now, this is the fill animation. Let's see here. So we have our base animation is kind of the meat of all of this. And the base animation is that fill animation. So we have the current fill, which is my fill being incremented on the tap, minus the current fill, and then being multiplied by, again, the elapsed time with the smooth time. All of those things go into making sure that the animation smoothly plays up into the certain point that it needs to play. So each time you press that button, it checks to see where in the animation it is, and animates it up to that smooth point. We're using the base animation dot animation apply, because base animation is it's a Flare animation layer. We have a reference to not only the base animation time, but also the animation. So here we're going to apply the animation with the current fill times the duration, with a reference to the artboard, and again mixing to 1. So this is the main part of all of this. If you're not getting this apply, then you're not getting an animation. And as the animation's playing through, sorry about that. Yeah, as the animation's playing through, we're also we can also check for any trigger events. And so here's where we have the chunk of code kind of leading into that. Let's see here. So we have our list for animation events, and we have a double for the current layer of animation, which is our base animation time. Because what we're going to be doing is the trigger event is going to be comparing the artboard with a check each time the animation increments. And at any given point, the trigger is keyframed at that point in the animation. That's whenever it'll add to our list. And then in the list, we'll be able to check our event name, or if we also have custom properties, that kind of works the same way. I'll kind of get into that in a few minutes. And then as soon as the event is added to that list, we can compare the names to it and see if it's the event that we want and do what we want with that event. You can have multiple events in an animation. It doesn't have to be just one. You can have an event for an animation for one thing and an event for triggering a secondary animation for something else. So yeah, you can have multiple triggers, multiple custom properties as well. So custom properties are kind of like triggers, but you can assign them variables, so they can be a boolean, a float, a string. So if you have a custom property string set to keyframe during an animation, that string can actually correlate to a sound effect string in your app. So it won't have to, you won't have to tell it in the app what sound to play. That string will tell it what sound to play. So you can do get really creative with that. All right, so in this, we have our animation events, which we're iterating through. And in this case, our event is called event. And whenever the fill animation gets to the event keyframe, then that's when we'll go ahead and animate the pop-up and show the pop-up at the same time and play the sound. All right, and so then going back to the button back on the main.dart, we can go ahead and set that back, or give that reference to the controller increment fill. So every time you increment the counter based on the tap, it'll increment the fill based on the custom FlareController. And then we'll also be setting state to know if the radial is full or not. And so is full is also calling back to the controller to check if the radial is full. Because if it is, then we'll change that icon from a plus to a refresh. That way the user can restart. So I want to kind of show you guys what this looks like in action. Hopefully y'all can see that. George, or Jorge, sorry, can you tell me if you can see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thanks. Awesome. So here's our Android emulator running all of that code. We have our base radial, it's empty right now. And each time, I press this raised button, it increments. And then it'll eventually fill up. All right, and then here's our pop-up. And then notice how the plus button turns into a restart button, or a refresh button is what I used. So whenever we tap this, it resets back. Everything gets reset to 0. So we can start all over again. And then our sound effect plays and everything comes up. So yeah, super basic, but enough to kind of get your hands dirty with playing around with some of these things. Let's see here. I'll show you back onto the file. And so these are each of our 3 animations that we showed earlier. And this is the fill. And then the pop-up. So yeah. I can go ahead and answer any questions. Oh, actually, there's one more thing I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you kind of in detail these triggers. If you're in design mode and you're looking at the trigger node, you'll see that it has an event on it. And you can rename these events however you want. And events are very similar to custom properties. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have different custom properties. You can name them to be, an audio or a sound effect. And it can be a few different things. A Boolean, a string, a float, and an integer. And so if you set it to be a string, you can give it a value. The value can be the name of your sound effect, like, And then whenever you hit this in your animation, it'll be right here. You'll keyframe it right there. And then in our for loop, we'll be checking for it. And in this case, it's event, but in that case, it would be sound effect. And we could pass a string here to say what the event name was. So there should be a value. Let's see here. So we could pass that. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah, you could definitely use the custom property to drive the audio volume as well. Again, back in here, the custom property. Let's see here. I'm in design mode. Okay. You can have multiple custom properties. So if you wanted that value, that sound effect to have an audio volume, and you can definitely set that to however you want. And then, of course, in animate mode, you could then also add that as a keyframe. So there we'd want it to be 0.5, and there we'd want it to do our ding sound. And so on the trigger node, we now have 2 keyframes, one for our sound effect, and then one for our volume. And for custom property, you can change those so that you know exactly what they are, which I totally recommend doing. Sound, volume. And it should update now. Let's see here. There's great. All right, cool. Any other questions? Anything I didn't cover that you had questions about or you wanted to know more about, let me know as well.
All right, so I've been checking, and it seems like you answered the question from Matthews. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. I don't have any questions, but I can tell you that I learned a lot. Definitely, like, this is a topic that I don't have the opportunity to working with it like every day. So seeing people that they're kind of like proficient and they know where to go to do these tricks and how to explain it is it's fantastic. It blows my mind. It's really nice to see. So
cool. Well, hopefully I didn't go through it too quickly. I felt like, you know, it kind of flew by. And so hopefully that was long enough for everything to kind of soak in a little bit. But yeah, the most important things are really your Flare actor has to be in a container. You have to have, you know, your animations set up right. For example, one issue that I had when setting this stuff up was the end pop-up. Whatever keyframes you set to it, if you had the fill pop-up turned to opaque, turn translucent whenever you finish the pop-up, then whenever you restart the fill, you need to make sure that those things are keyframed again. So there's a lot of anything that you're keying, you have to make sure that whenever you play another animation that it cancels those keys out. So there's a little, you know, a few little caveats like that and stuff, but overall, yeah, it's not too overwhelming.
Awesome. So one of the questions that I just standing that we're typing when we're talking, Matthias is asking if there are any performance issues when you add many layers to an animation.
I haven't come across any performance issues with that. I know at one of the meetups that we demoed at, there was so many animations on screen at the same time and there weren't any performance hits. But yeah, with many layers, in a Flutter app, I would have to look into that. I know exporting something that has a ton of layers might take a while, but yeah, I'd have to look into actually seeing how long it would, or what kind of performance it would take in a Flutter app, especially, you know, a Flutter app on mobile. But yeah, I can check into that and let you know.
Sounds good. Well, I think unless you have something else to tell us, we're gonna.
I was just gonna say, I will, Steph, I will be posting this on GitHub, because she was asking if there's gonna be a YouTube, if it's gonna stay on YouTube. But I will also post this code on GitHub, and I'll also make this file available to you as well for public use. So if anyone wants to play with this, fork it, use it, they are more than welcome to do that.
No, it's okay. Awesome. Well, I think everyone is on the chat telling you like, hey, thank you so much. This was amazing. Um, if someone that is watching us out there wants to participate by talking, by proposing an idea or whatever it is, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be very happy to host you. Otherwise, please share this with as many people as you can. It's available for everyone, so go and spread the word, and enjoy it. Thank you so much for being with us. And all right, everyone, have a good night.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I just finished this.